There's a man on Tilikum's back. He's naked. Somebody call 911.
The scream echoed through the empty stands of SeaWorld Orlando just after sunrise. Security guards rushed to the edge of the massive orca tank, stunned into silence. Floating motionless on the back of a killer whale was a man, naked, lifeless, and the orca beneath him, Tilikum, drifted in slow circles as if nothing had happened. How did a man end up dead, naked on the back of a killer whale in a high-security theme park overnight? Was it a tragic accident, a suicide, or something far more disturbing? SeaWorld Orlando, July 6th, 7 a.m. The whale, Tilikum, one of the largest orcas ever held in captivity, already linked to a deadly history. The man, 27-year-old Daniel Dukes, a drifter with deep spiritual beliefs who had managed to sneak into the park undetected after hours. He wasn't a trainer. He had no business being in that tank. And yet, by morning, his body was covered in bite marks, bruises, and strangely, his clothes were found folded neatly nearby. This is the terrifying story of Daniel Dukes and the orca that may have claimed his life. Welcome to the Animal Quest channel. If you're passionate about real-life animal attack stories that go beyond the headlines, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others who care about uncovering the truth behind the tragedy. Now, let's look deeper into the story. Daniel Patrick Dukes was born in 1971 and grew up in Riviera Beach, Florida, a coastal city better known for quiet neighborhoods and warm breezes than the headlines he would one day make. At 27 years old, Daniel wasn't the kind of person who fit neatly into a box. Friends, few and far between, described him as reserved, strange even, but not dangerous. He walked through life with a kind of stillness, detached from the noise of modern society. Daniel wasn't a criminal, he wasn't violent, but he was undeniably different. He was known to travel alone, often vanishing for days with only a backpack and a journal. Those who encountered him noticed how often he talked about finding deeper meaning in life. His belief in the spiritual connection between humans and animals, the idea that everything in nature had a voice, a soul, and a lesson to teach. He kept to himself and avoided technology. He'd briefly joined the Hare Krishnas and dabbled in various spiritual communities over the years. Many who met him recalled his fascination with freedom, both human and animal. But above all, Daniel had an obsession with marine life. He would often talk about whales, especially orcas. He believed they were misunderstood, ancient beings that could teach us something profound about existence. If only we listened. By all accounts, he wasn't employed steadily. He'd couch surf, hitchhike, sometimes disappear across state lines. He was soft-spoken, polite, but there was always an air of mystery about him. Some described him as mentally unstable. Others just saw him as someone deeply introspective, perhaps too much so. In the weeks leading up to July 1999, Daniel had made his way to Orlando, Florida. No one knew why exactly. He didn't leave a note. He didn't call family or friends. But according to police reports and SeaWorld's guest records, he entered the park during normal business hours on July 5th, just like any other tourist. At first glance, he blended in with the crowd, just another face in the sea of summer guests walking beneath palm trees, waiting in line for rides, watching the orca shows. But Daniel had no intention of leaving when the park closed. Sometime before the final sweep of security that evening, Daniel quietly slipped away. But why did he do that? On the afternoon of July 5th, 1999, Daniel Dukes walked through the front gates of SeaWorld Orlando, just like thousands of others that day. Temperatures hovered in the high 80s, the summer crowds buzzed with excitement, and trainers guided killer whales through acrobatic routines to the roar of cheering families. But for Daniel, this wasn't just another visit. This wasn't about amusement rides or animal shows. Something deeper had drawn him here. He blended in, moving through the park without drawing attention. Surveillance footage from that day captured nothing unusual. No theft, no confrontation, no sign of what would follow. He was just another guest, until the sun began to set. As the park approached closing hours, the crowd slowly thinned. Families filtered toward the exits. Vendors shut down their kiosks. Security made its final rounds, ushering the last few stragglers out through the turnstiles. But Daniel never left. Somehow, without detection, he managed to slip away. Investigators later speculated that he may have hidden in a restroom near Shamu Stadium, a massive open-air arena reserved for the park's signature orca performances. Another theory is that he concealed himself in a storage area behind the stage. But one thing is certain: when the lights went dark across SeaWorld that night, Daniel Dukes was still inside. What happened next is pieced together only from forensics, circumstantial evidence, and grim discovery. Sometime after the last employee had clocked out, and while security patrols had moved to the outer perimeter of the park, Daniel emerged from hiding. There were no signs of forced entry. No alarms were triggered. SeaWorld would later confirm that their orca tanks were not covered or sealed at night. From where Daniel stood at the edge of the stage, the towering wall of saltwater just a few feet below, he could see the massive, slow-moving shape of Tilikum gliding silently beneath the surface. Tilikum at that time was the largest orca in captivity, over 22 feet long, weighing more than 12,000 pounds. His black and white form was unmistakable, yet in the dark stillness of the night, he moved like a ghost through the water. We don't know how long Daniel stood there, or whether he hesitated. What we do know, based on the position of his clothing, later recovered neatly folded near the tank, is that he removed his clothes voluntarily. Then he entered the water. There were no scratches, no signs of a struggle along the platform. His footprints were found at the pool's edge, and from that moment, whatever happened between him and Tilikum played out in complete silence, unseen by any cameras or witnesses. Was Daniel hoping to swim with the orca? To connect with him spiritually, as he'd written about in his journals? Or did he understand the danger and choose this as a final act of surrender? Suicide was never officially ruled, but nothing about that night followed a script anyone expected. At some point during the early hours of July 6th, Daniel Dukes died in that tank. Whether it happened quickly or slowly is unknown. Whether it was Tilikum's aggression or simply the overwhelming environment remains unanswered. But when morning arrived, the scene awaiting SeaWorld staff would burn itself into the memory of every person who witnessed it. And with it, SeaWorld faced another reckoning it had hoped would never come again. Tuesday, July 6, 1999, SeaWorld Orlando, 7 a.m. The sun had just begun to rise over Central Florida. Trainers and staff members began arriving for the morning shift, preparing for another busy day of shows, feedings, and park routines. Everything appeared normal until someone entered G Pool, the tank housing the park's most infamous orca, Tilikum. What they saw would stop them cold. Floating across the surface of the water was a human body, completely naked, draped across Tilikum's back like a rag doll. The massive orca was still swimming, slow and steady, his dorsal fins slicing through the water. And with each pass around the tank, he carried the lifeless figure of a man. Staff immediately froze in shock. Some screamed. Others ran to call for help. The call to 911 was placed within moments. It was no longer just a morning check-in. It was a death scene. Emergency responders arrived shortly after. By then, Tilikum had already been corralled into a medical pool using a series of gates, standard SeaWorld procedure for isolating an orca. But the damage was done. As paramedics and police approached the edge of the tank, they confirmed what staff already knew. The man was dead. His body bore multiple injuries, bruises, abrasions, bite marks, but there were no signs of external bleeding. His arms were draped limply over Tilikum's back, his skin pale and waterlogged. The whale appeared eerily calm, as if unaware, or perhaps unfazed by the grim cargo he carried. In a later statement, SeaWorld staff described the moment with shocking clarity. The body was found on the back of the whale as it swam around the pool. The identity of the man was not immediately known. He carried no wallet, no ID, no phone. His clothing had been discovered nearby, folded neatly, placed with intention. It wasn't until later that day that fingerprints helped identify him as Daniel Dukes, a man who, by all accounts, had walked into the park as a guest and never left. Authorities immediately opened an investigation. SeaWorld executives scrambled to contain the media, and for a second time in Tilikum's life, the headlines would link his name to death. But this time, there were no trainers involved, No high-speed stunts, no crowds. Just a man, a whale, and the terrible silence of night. What exactly had happened in that tank? Was it an attack? A misunderstanding? Or had Daniel Dukes deliberately placed himself in harm's way, hoping to make peace with a creature that the world had long misunderstood? As investigators would soon learn, the truth would be just as murky as the water Daniel entered. Later that same day, the body of Daniel Dukes was transported to the Orange County Medical Examiner's office. An autopsy was ordered immediately. What it revealed was as disturbing as it was perplexing. The official cause of death was ruled as drowning. There were no defensive wounds, no fractures that would suggest a violent struggle before entering the water. But the body did show signs of post-mortem trauma, bruises and abrasions across the torso and limbs. Most notably, there were puncture wounds consistent with the conical-shaped teeth of an orca. These marks, examiners concluded, were likely inflicted after death. Daniel had been dead by the time Tilikum mouthed or toyed with the body, something orcas have been known to do in captivity, particularly when understimulated or stressed. There were no drugs or alcohol in Daniel's system. Toxicology came back clean. That detail added a shocking element to the mystery. Whatever led him to climb into that pool, he did so with full awareness. His clothing, found carefully folded on the ledge near the pool, suggested a kind of ritual. No torn fabric, no evidence of panic or coercion. It was a deliberate act. But the body itself showed one more grim detail that set off a media firestorm. One of Daniel's testicles was missing. There was no evidence of a sharp cut or clean separation. Pathologists believed it had likely been bitten off, possibly after death, while the whale carried the body in his mouth. Whether this was predatory behavior, play, or simply Tilikum interacting with a foreign object in his space, we'll never truly know. Tilikum, for his part, showed no signs of aggression when he was isolated that morning. According to SeaWorld's internal reports, he responded to cues and did not resist being moved into a medical pool. But in the days that followed, he was kept under close observation. Some theorized Daniel had tried to bond with the whale. Others believed he simply underestimated the animal's power. But there was no getting around the reality. Tilikum was not a trained pet. He was a massive apex predator, held in confinement for nearly 2 decades, with a long history of psychological stress. Daniel Dukes may have believed he was entering sacred water, a place of peace and connection. Instead, he entered a closed system of cement walls, steel gates, and a whale with a fractured past. And as the autopsy closed and the body was released to his family, investigators were only just beginning to understand the many layers of this tragedy. But does Tilikum really have history? To understand what happened to Daniel Dukes, you have to understand who Tilikum was. Tilikum was not born in captivity. He was taken, captured in 1983, torn from his pod at just 2 years old, in the frigid waters off the coast of Iceland. It was a practice now widely condemned. Helicopters and boats herding orcas into nets, calves separated from their mothers, sold to marine parks across the world. Tilikum's first destination was SeaWorld of the Pacific in British Columbia, Canada. There he was placed into a small enclosed tank alongside 2 older female orcas. He was younger, smaller, and constantly bullied. Forced to perform, punished for mistakes, and subjected to long hours floating alone in dark underwater pens, his early life in captivity laid the groundwork for psychological damage few fully understood at the time. Then in 1991, tragedy struck. During a training session at SeaWorld, a young biology student named Kelty Byrne slipped and fell into the orca pool. What followed was chaos. Witnesses said the whales pulled her under repeatedly. She struggled to stay afloat but never resurfaced. Tilikum was one of the 3 orcas involved. SeaWorld quickly closed its doors after the fatality, and not long after, Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld Orlando, where his size and appearance made him a valuable asset. At over 22 feet long and weighing more than 12,000 pounds, he became the largest orca in captivity anywhere in the world. But his life didn't improve. At SeaWorld, Tilikum was isolated for most of the day. Trainers interacted with him sparingly due to his unpredictable nature. Unlike the park's more trusted whales, Tilikum wasn't used in waterwork. He performed tricks, yes, but trainers did not swim with him. And when he wasn't on display, he spent long hours in a medical pool with minimal stimulation. Over time, his behavior became more erratic. Signs of what marine mammal experts now recognize as zoochosis, a condition marked by repetitive motions, aggression, and psychological breakdown caused by extreme confinement. He was used primarily for breeding purposes, fathering more than 20 calves. But even as he contributed to SeaWorld's expansion of captive orcas, he was never treated as safe. The danger was always there, beneath the surface. Just one mistake, one misstep, and the consequences could be fatal. And they were, because Kelty Byrne wasn't the only person to lose her life in Tilikum's presence. Daniel Dukes would be next, and years later, there would be another. Tilikum was not just a whale, he was a symbol of something much larger, the immense, destructive toll that captivity can take on a wild, intelligent creature. As one former trainer later put it, this wasn't Tilikum's first fatality, and tragically, it wouldn't be his last. The death of Daniel Dukes sent immediate shockwaves through the media, the public, and the marine park industry. The circumstances were so bizarre, so unthinkable, that the story became national news overnight. Within weeks, Daniel's family filed a lawsuit against SeaWorld, accusing the park of negligence. According to their claim, SeaWorld failed to secure a facility that housed a known dangerous animal. They argued that Daniel should never have been able to remain in the park undetected, let alone access a restricted tank with a 12,000-pound apex predator. SeaWorld, however, responded swiftly and firmly. Their legal defense centered on one claim: Daniel was a trespasser. They stated he had hidden deliberately after hours, circumvented multiple security barriers, and entered a clearly restricted area marked with no trespassing and danger, do not enter signs. To them, the tragedy was not a failure of security, but a deliberate act by a troubled individual. Still, the controversy only deepened. The press latched onto every angle. Headlines began asking uncomfortable questions. Why was Tilikum still performing after being involved in a fatality years earlier? Why weren't more protections in place for humans and for the whales? Animal welfare advocates reignited their protests. Former trainers and marine mammal experts stepped forward, calling the conditions of captivity inhumane. SeaWorld, in response, released statements asserting their commitment to safety, science, and education. But they refused to pull Tilikum from shows. Despite the fact that Daniel Dukes became the second person to die in Tilikum's presence, the whale remained a central attraction. Shows continued, crowds still cheered, and the orca, who had now been connected to 2 deaths, swam beneath the surface, his towering dorsal fin breaking through the water like a ghost in the machine. The tragedy of Daniel Dukes didn't just spark legal battles and PR damage, it became a symbol of a much deeper issue. One that questioned not just the actions of a single man or a single park, but the very ethics of keeping the ocean's most powerful predators in glass tanks for human entertainment. After some years, Tilikum's life changed in subtle but significant ways. After the death of trainer Don Brancheau in 2010, his third associated fatality, Tilikum was removed from waterwork entirely. He spent much of his remaining years in isolation, swimming slow laps in a back medical pool away from the public eye. He became both a symbol of controversy and the centerpiece of a growing debate about orca captivity. Activists, scientists, and former trainers cited his story, along with Daniel Dukes's, as proof of a broken system. One that transformed intelligent, social, emotionally complex animals into ticking time bombs. Tilikum died in 2017 at the estimated age of 36. By then, he had spent more than 3 decades in captivity, longer than most orcas survive in tanks. His legacy is stained by tragedy: 3 human lives lost, countless headlines, and an industry forever changed. And yet, Daniel Dukes remains one of the most enigmatic pieces of that legacy. A 27-year-old man from Riviera Beach, seeking something beyond the ordinary, perhaps connection, perhaps understanding, who entered a high-security marine park, made his way past barriers, and slipped into a pool with the most dangerous orca on record. He didn't leave a note. He left only questions. Was it curiosity? Was it delusion? Or was it a young man's final search for connection, met by the dark silence of the deep? Daniel Dukes may have entered that tank looking for meaning, but what he found was a tragedy, one that still echoes today in documentaries and courtrooms, in the evolving public opinion about how we treat the wild creatures we claim to love. If this story moved you, consider learning more about marine mammal captivity and what you can do to support wildlife preservation and ethical treatment. And finally, if you found this video powerful, please like, subscribe, and share to help spread awareness. This is just one of many real stories that show the complicated and sometimes horrifying intersection of humans and the animals we cannot control. Until next time, thank you for watching.